a law. It was just a principle. It was a mindset. It was a way of living that God himself showed us in the creation account. And in this mentality, you resist the urge to keep on going. It's when you stop doing what your normal activity would normally be in order to have time for the things you would not normally spend time doing, the simple things of life that have begun to escape us because we've become too busy. And not only in your time, maybe this Sabbath principle that I'm sharing with you is not just about your time, maybe it's in regard to your space. I mean the space you work, your desk space or your living space or your closet. You have so much stuff, you don't just have one closet. It's now spilling over into that closet and that closet and that closet. You go to work on your desk, but you can't actually get any work done because there are so many piles of so many different things all over the place. There is actually no room to really get done what it is that guys, namely Jerry Shire, are you into technology where there are so many technological gadgets that you got one gadget that just does one more thing than this gadget does? But you have to get the new gadget because this gadget might look different than that gadget in just the slightest way, and that's enough for you to get the new gadget because you like the new gadget better than the old gadget. And so we have so many gadgets. Women, we have so many clothes. We have so much furniture crowding our space that there is no margin. And so we become enslaved to the very places that God has given us to enjoy. The walls are closing in on us. There's no margin. There is no breathing room. Somebody has to know when to stop. We've got to know when we've worked enough, tried enough, gathered enough, purchased enough, said enough, stored enough, kept enough, created enough, produced enough, generated enough, consumed enough, labored enough, expended enough, spent enough. Somebody's got to know when to say enough is enough. Would you look at the person next to you and say enough is enough? I don't want you to turn there because I don't want to take the time to read through all of it, but I want to encourage you to check out Exodus chapter 16 when you have time, because this is the first opportunity for us to really see the Sabbath principle at work. God gave the children of Israel manna from the heavens, and he said to them, you gather on day 1 through 6, do not gather on the 7th day. I am providing you manna, cornflakes from above, for 6 straight days. You gather each day, but on the 7th, you chill out. You relax. The scriptures tell us around verse 25 and 26 that they gathered for all these 6 days, and Moses said to them, make sure you don't gather on the 7th, but some of them went out to gather anyway. Who does that sound like? And it says, when they went out to gather, verse 26, this is what they found. They found none. One of the ways for you to know if you have stepped on the Sabbath margin in your life that the Lord is trying to get you to keep and carve out to do something other than the normal activity that would normally usually consume you. One of the ways you know you have stepped into that margin is if you are gathering but coming up empty. If you are trying, if you are working hard, if the cost that you are putting out is not equal to the benefit that you are seeing at the end, you might know that you are stepping into the margin that should be reserved for God. The children of Israel were gathering, but they were coming up completely empty. They found nothing, and some of us are finding nothing. The first principle of the Sabbath is, would you resist the urge to continue? The second thing that I love so much that the Lord said to the children of Israel when he gave them this law in Deuteronomy chapter 5, not only that they are to resist the urge to continue, but verse 15 he said that you need to remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. So he says, resist the urge to continue, and then he says, here's what the Sabbath is all about. It's about remembering what you used to be. Past tense emphasis. Remember that you used to be a slave. He says, take a moment to think back to what slavery felt like. Would you remember what it felt like to have someone oppressing you, where you did not have any freedom to pick and choose what you would do with your time and how you would spend your energy? Would you remember what slavery felt like? He says, I have freed you, and I want you to remember that there should be a dichotomy between the way you used to feel and act and the way you feel and act right now. And if we were to pass the microphone around in this room, starting with me, I bet there would be lots of intense testimonies from people who remember what it was like to be enslaved. When you could not put down that drink, when you could would you remember that's what you used to be? Now you have been set free. And the Sabbath, the margin in your life, is all about walking in the freedom that you have been given. It is about realizing that unlike a slave, think of the children of Israel. When they were given food in slavery, Egypt was a very lush place to be. There was lots of vegetation. Nutrients from the Nile River would cause there to be the vegetation in Egypt to be absolutely stunning. They had a lot at their disposal in terms of nutritious and delicious food, but it was just rationed out to them because they were slaves. And when you have a slave mentality, anytime you were given anything, you hoard it. You keep it. You hang on to it. You stuff your pockets. You stuff your pantries, because the slave mentality lives with closed fists. Hangs on to stuff. God says, would you remember that that's who you used to be? That you're not a slave anymore. That the whole Sabbath mentality is when we don't live with a slave's mindset regarding the things that God has given us as gifts. Slaves hoard, but free people give. Slaves live fearfully, but free people live generously and lovingly. Slaves live with closed fists, but free people live with open palms. Slaves, they live from a posture of lack, but free people live from a posture of abundance. Slaves live from a position of deficiency, but free people live from a place of holy expectation. Slaves never think they have enough, but free people believe that whatever they don't have, God will graciously and miraculously provide in His timing. In fact, in the children of Israel's story, this is so clearly seen. Because back in Exodus chapter 16, as they're gathering manna, God not only said to them, gather 6 days, but then don't gather on the seventh day. That was one principle, resist the urge to continue. But He also basically emphasized this principle to them, remember that you were a slave, when He said to them, you're going to gather every day, and at the end of the day, do not hang on to your leftovers. That's what you had to do in Egypt when you were living in slavery. You don't have to do that anymore. You're going to trust that if I can provide for you day 1 through 6, I got day 7 covered. In fact, what He said is, I'm going to give you a double portion on day 6. And if you believe me for the double portion, you don't have to worry about your day 7 experience. I'll take care of day 7 with what I will give you day 1 through 6. And I just want to encourage you all that if you remember that a slave is what we used to be, but it is not who we are now, then you can count on and believe and trust in the day 1 through 6 experience of your life. And again, this might not be about specifically your days. This is a principle that I'm talking about. That if you have not been carving out margin in a certain area of your life because you're just unsure, if I take space here, if I take margin here, if I take a breather here, how in the world am I going to be able to make it through this particular area? Where's the sustenance going to come from? The Sabbath mentality teaches us that a double portion from God is better than your strenuous activity on day 7 any day. Remember that you used to be a slave, my friend, but you are not. I am not, thank God, a slave anymore. Anybody glad about that? We're not a slave anymore. There is one final principle that I want to share with you from this passage. It's my favorite. Not only are you supposed to resist the urge to continue, not only are you supposed to remember that you were a slave, but He says in verse 15, would you remember that God brought you out of there by a mighty hand and outstretched arm? So He said, would you recall what the Lord has done? I love this, and I want to show you something so that you get this in your spirit and never forget it. He says, I want you to recall what God has accomplished on your behalf. Now remember I said to you that the first time we see this whole Sabbath thing, it is not with the children of Israel in the gathering of manna. It is not even now in Deuteronomy 5 when Moses is recounting the giving of the law. That's not the first time we see it. You'll remember that in the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then He took day 7 after 6 days of work, and He Himself took a Sabbath. I have always seen the 6 days of creation as just a linear display of God's creation processes. I have never really seen a pattern or a structure to the way God laid out His processes in creation. And yet there is a dynamic in the order of creation that if you and I will see this clearly, we will recognize the importance of the creation story's meaning as we implement Sabbath in our life. And so I want to show you this. I think we have it for you. On day 1, God created the day and the night.